China is rigging elections in New York City. Oh man, YouTube is gonna ban this episode, aren't they? Welcome to China Uncensored, I'm Chris Chappell. Over the years, we've covered a lot of stories about Chinese influence operations in the United States, particularly on a local level. But it has nearly always focused on compromised individuals. Remember Linda Sun, anyone? But it turns out in New York City, that's right, my home turf, it's way more coordinated than just an individual here or there. The New York Times recently released a story on how China influences elections in America's biggest city. The Gray Lady, a nickname for the New York Times, not a reincarnated B. Arthur, found devastating information, even if not surprising for those who've been paying attention. Looking at you, you beautiful people. It turns out that the CCP and its consulates have direct influence over a number of Chinese diaspora organizations known as hometown associations. They're called that because a lot of the people in them came from the same city or village. Of course, many of these hometown associations don't do anything wrong, they're just community gathering centers that put on cultural events. But they have enormous influence over local politics in the Big Apple. And it turns out Chinese diplomats are in constant contact with some of these groups' leaders. The New York Times shows Chinese consulate officials administering the swearing-in oaths for leaders of many of these groups, oaths that frequently include language about reunification with Taiwan. So instead of ordinary community leaders or people solely interested in Chinese American community interests, there is direct involvement from the CCP in even shaping who gets to run these hometown associations. Is it any wonder so many of them have been compromised? So what kind of influence do these hometown associations have? Well, let me tell you, according to the New York Times, more than 50 organizations with ties to Beijing, including a number of hometown associations, have mobilized members to fundraise or endorse political candidates over the past 5 years. This despite the fact that many of these organizations have tax-exempt status, which means they're legally barred from endorsing or financing political candidates. Though to you beautiful people, that's not a surprise, since the CCP sees foreign laws as suggestions that they cackle at and see how many they can break before lunch. New York City politics is often decided by ethnic voting blocks. So when one of these hometown associations supports a candidate, that candidate almost always wins. According to the New York Times, at least 9 of these hometown associations have endorsed Mayor Eric Adams in his upcoming bid for re-election. Which surprises me because I thought they'd be more into socialist Zoran Mamdani, but the New York Times doesn't say one way or another about him. For example, Dixon Mai, who leads Chonglo USA Association headquarters, said he was mobilizing the group's 2,000 members to re-elect Mr. Adams, saying, "We are all united in voting for him." So that's something to keep an eye on. But it's not just about who they like and endorse, it's also about who they don't like. What I'm about to tell you is truly wild. But if you like this kind of deep dive into what's really going on with China, you've got to subscribe to my premium website, ChinaUncensored.tv. That's where you'll see episodes and live streams we can't put on YouTube. And if you want to support China Uncensored, buying a membership is the best way you can. It's just the price of a bag of coffee. Once again, that's ChinaUncensored.tv. So, hometown associations have helped CCP operatives working in Manhattan's Chinese consulates to foil political careers, specifically of people who didn't toe China's line. Take, for example, former Democratic New York Senator Ewen Chu, who was born in Taiwan. In 2023, she attended a banquet with then Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen. Days after the banquet, Chinese diplomats invited some hometown association members to the consulate and asked them about Chu's stance on Taiwan. Then, not long after, a Chinese consulate official met with Chu, and then Chu found herself being ostracized by community leaders with close ties to the Chinese government. Then, a former heroin trafficker and human smuggler named John Chan got involved. Chan has extensive ties both to the CCP and local New York City politics. In February 2024, he was already vetting Republican Steve Chan to run against Chu. John Chan even reportedly convinced Stephen Chan, no relation by the way, to soften his stance on Taiwan independence and Hong Kong democracy, although Steve Chan insists his views didn't change. Then, John Chan worked his magic. And with that, leaders of hometown associations that once backed Chu flipped to Steve Chan, who, surprise, surprise, won the race. Zhen Jinrong, a longtime leader of the Taishan Friendship Association Home Association, said if Yuan hadn't attended that event, 100% she would have won. And Justin Yu, a former president of the Consolidated Chinese Benevolent Association, which includes more than 60 groups, said he believed that the consulate mobilized some of the organizations in Brooklyn to boycott Yuan Chu. To make matters worse, when Stephen Chan was questioned about why he would accept help from someone like John Chan, remember, a heroin dealer and human trafficker, Stephen Chan told the New York Times that whether you like him or not, whether he's a communist or not, he is very influential in his community. But Chu wasn't alone in dealing with this kind of interference. Back in 2022, a man named Yang Xiong ran for Congress. He was a former leader from the 1989 Tiananmen Square protest, or as it's known in China, the what? I have no idea what you're talking about. He had spent 2 years in prison in China, and he believed his background would help him win. But federal prosecutors found that an agent from China's Ministry of State Security, or MSS, colluded with a private investigator, actually an FBI asset, to derail his candidacy. Ideas ranged from beating him up to hiring a prostitute to seduce him. Or if he was into BDSM, maybe both. Even though the scheme was exposed, he still lost his race and told the New York Post, "I couldn't raise any money. I used my own money because they pressured everyone in the community to stay away from me to sink my campaign, and they succeeded." How do they accomplish that? Through the hometown associations. Then there's the case of Democratic Councilwoman Susan Zhuang, who gained fame for biting a police officer at a homeless shelter protest. Zhuang won her seat back in 2023 when pictures emerged of her opponent, Wai Chan, attending a pro-democracy Hong Kong rally in Manhattan. Zhuang posted on Facebook that her opponent was supporting violent Hong Kong independence. More violent than biting a policeman? During the city council race, prominent community members circulated the rally images on WeChat and claimed that Chan held extreme positions. Chan's campaign manager said that some community leaders urged Chan to take out newspaper ads with pictures of her holding the Chinese flag to show which side she's on, further saying it was bananas. When that didn't happen, hometown associations dumped her for Zhuang, who has since appeared around 30 times alongside consulate officials and gave over $300,000 in city funds to tax-exempt Chinese-American nonprofits that supported her, many of which have ties to the CCP. Zhuang maintains that accusations of her ties to the CCP are biased and racist, and a spokeswoman with the Chinese Consulate General says that it follows international laws and doesn't influence US elections. But at a January fundraiser, Zhuang's campaign raised over $20,000 more, including from many of the same supporters. The MC of the fundraiser was Joseph Lo, president of the American Association of Cantonese, who met with group leaders from the United Front Work Department in China back in 2023. The list of shady connections goes on, and this isn't only happening in America or even in New York City. It may not seem like it makes a lot of sense. After all, New York is half a world away from China, and who cares about local races, right? But according to one expert with the American Enterprise Institute, the Chinese Communist Party is determined to quash dissent in its diaspora before it spreads back home. But besides its large Chinese population, there's another reason why the Big Apple is such a tempting target for the CCP. It's the biggest city in the US, a cultural icon, and the world's financial capital. Not to mention home to Joe's Pizza, perhaps the most important of all these American institutions. This is basically a communist sabotage campaign in the heart of world capitalism. Whatever happens here will trickle down into other cities and even other countries in some way. And what better way to start than by influencing local politics? Especially because you never know when one of these local politicians, senators, or representatives might go on to run for president, potentially serving the CCP well from the highest office in the land. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.